Hey guys, this is another video for our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist, and it's another one of those heads up type videos where it's not really about doing anything, it's just being aware of something so it doesn't catch you out when it happens. So the meaning will become clearer hopefully as the explanation goes on. But it's to do with people speaking English to you in Japan. So of course when you first come to Japan, or if you come to Japan on a holiday and your Japanese isn't very good and somebody speaks English to you, it can be a wonderful thing, you know, because you're sort of trying to work out what's going on and what to do and what not to do and where to go and how to do things. And if someone suddenly speaks English to you, it can be a wonderful, wonderful thing. And that's why we do the English Friendly Japan thing, because we think it's a very useful thing for people that are coming here for a holiday or here for a short term or who can't speak Japanese. Then there's another component too, people who do speak Japanese reasonably well and who live here long term. People who can speak English to us can be extremely useful as well. Useful's a bad word, but can be wonderful to meet. For example, accountants and lawyers and people like that, where you've got to deal with difficult topics, dentists and doctors and people like that. It can be much easier if you get somebody whose English level is pretty good and can help you with those sort of difficult topics. Also, it's just nice, you know, sometimes when people crack out a little bit of English, it's sort of nice. But usually what ends up happening is, as your Japanese skills improve, usually what happens is, if your Japanese skills are pretty good and the other person's English skills are not very good, usually what happens is you end up speaking Japanese. And it's just because usually when you're here long term, most of the conversations that you have are about communication. It's not usually just a social thing. Usually there's some sort of communication going on, and it just is a natural progression that whichever person has the other language, has greater language skills in the other language, usually ends up being the language that you end up speaking. So if your Japanese skills are not very good, the other person's English skills are pretty good, you'll end up speaking English. It's usually what happens. Or if your Japanese skills are pretty good, their English skills are not very good, you'll end up speaking Japanese. So that's all sort of natural and that's all sort of good. And the whole thing's fun. When you first come here, it's all sort of fun and interesting, you know, and if someone speaks English to you and a couple of words of English or something, it's a bit of a novelty, and it's a novelty for them, and it's all good. The purpose of this video is to talk about another phenomenon that happens sometimes when you've been here quite a while, or even if you haven't been, but if you've been here a while, you're living here long term and your Japanese skills are reasonably good. What can sometimes happen is you're trying to just live your life, you're trying to get things done, you're trying to communicate with people, you're trying to achieve things, get things done and do what you need to do. And what can happen is, while you're doing that, you're naturally communicating in Japanese with everybody. You know, if you're doing reasonably well, people are understanding what you're saying, you're understanding what they're saying, and it's all going well. And then you'll find yourself maybe going into a convenience store somewhere and you have a bit of an exchange with the staff in the convenience store in Japanese, and then suddenly that person behind the counter starts saying some bad English to you. Spoon, spoon, and yeah, spoon, spoon. Like they're talking to a kid, or they're talking to someone who's a bit mentally challenged or something, you know. Spoon, spoon. Probably a better example, I'll give you another one, is when we were renovating a house, and you would have seen on the Buying House in Japan playlist, some of you might have seen those videos about renovating the old farmhouse. And in that process, we needed to talk to a lot of different tradespeople, electricians and plumbers and carpenters and all sorts of landscapers, and all sorts of people come at different stages to do different aspects of the renovation. Council staff, surveyors, lots of different people. And in that process, there was actually a builder who was a real estate guy, builder guy, who was involved as well. And he sort of oversaw a lot of the construction work, a lot of the tradespeople. And wonderful man, and really amazing, honest, amazing, good man, you know. But naturally enough, you know, he lives in Japan, he doesn't speak any English, so that was fine. We got by with Japanese. But what happened was, one day we had the pest control. This is an example. This actually happened many times with this man, but the one example that comes to mind is we had the pest control company there, and they were checking the building for pests, and in particular white ant, because white ant is a problem in Japan as it is in some other countries. and it can be really aggressive. And if you get white ant into your nice old wooden building, they can just eat right through it, you know, and it's a nightmare if you get white ant in the building. So we don't want white ant. So we had the pest control guy there, and we had during the day all these heavy discussions with all these different people, you know, the electrician and the carpenter and the plumber, and everyone was there at once working, Japanese style. When construction's happening, everyone gets into it, you know, there's no sort of waiting around for them to turn up, everybody's there and they're all into it. And so we'd had lots of conversations with all these different people, and as you can imagine, the topics were many and varied and quite difficult. And topics like that can be difficult in a second language, because quite often you're hearing terms that you've never heard before and phrases that you've never heard before, and so it can be tricky to work it all out. But you know, we're getting by, no problem. And then we're having this conversation with the pest control guy, and the builder was there, and he was sort of listening. He wasn't really saying much, he was just listening, because the conversation was mostly between me and the pest control guy and myself. And it's a big long explanation about the white ant, and we've got to look out for this, look out for this, and I'm saying, right, yeah, I've got you, same thing in Australia, same problem, and you know, talking about it. And we're standing near the bathroom, and he said, you've got to watch near the bathroom, anywhere where water leaks, white ants can come. And this is all in Japanese, right? This is all in Japanese. Anywhere where water leaks, you can get white ant nests, because they'll have water, and they'll often come in with this water. And then amongst this big long conversation that we're having, the builder says in English, water. Because in amongst the conversation in Japanese, this pest control guy had said mizu, the Japanese word for water, a few times. And so in the middle of this conversation, suddenly the builder says to me, water. Like he's talking to a kid, right? And this is the sort of thing, and it happens regularly. It happens regularly, you know. You'll be having a conversation with a bunch of Japanese people about some topic, and someone says something, and then someone there who speaks no English really at all, but just happens to know a couple of English words, because you hear English words on TV here and things, and you know, a common one you'll get is no, 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 no. You'll be having a conversation with a Japanese person about something, and you know, quite complex conversation. If it had subtitles, you'd be, you know, it's quite a complex conversation, and then suddenly they'll say to you, no, 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 no. And it happens to be one of the few words that they actually know in English, so they throw it out there. Now, the reason for this video is, when you first come to Japan, things like that can be sort of funny or amusing, or you might not even notice them, you know, it's usually not a problem. But what happens is, when you live here long term, and it's not easy living in a country where you're speaking a second language. Those of you who live in a country where you're speaking a second language all day, every day, would understand that it can be quite difficult and quite challenging. Hey, there goes a ferret. Sorry guys, it's just out of view, you would have missed it, sorry. And he's gone now, he's in the rice field. So yeah, it can be quite challenging living in a country where you're speaking another language, a second language all day, every day. And so it's quite hard work. And then what can happen is, when you're having rather complex conversations with people, and suddenly someone throws in a spoon, or a no, 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 like they're talking to a kid, and that's the sort of the voice. I'm not exaggerating terribly much there. That's pretty much what it's like. Water. It can be really annoying, is the bottom line, right? It can be really annoying, and sometimes you just want to shake your head, and because, you know, if the person was actually breaking out some English that was useful, you'd be grateful for it. But when you're having a really complex conversation and holding your own in that second language, and then someone throws in a comment like that, which can feel really demeaning, you know, it can feel as if, you know, really, is my Japanese that bad that you think you need to explain no, 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 or spoon, you know, complete with action, or water, and you know, and the other thing is that when you've had this happen to you a few hundred times, it starts to wear a bit thin, you know, and and it's a common thing. It's a common thing for people to live here long term, for have them drive them crazy. This aspect to drive them crazy. And the interesting thing is that if you have this happen to you regularly, and you point it out to your Japanese friends that you spend time with, they'll start to notice it too. And it can actually become a bit of a running joke, you know. For example, some of the people around me, I've talked to them about this, you know, and once they become aware of it, they start to notice it too, because we'll be in a restaurant somewhere and, you know, some staff member will say, spoon, you know, or we'll be with some other people who don't speak English and they'll throw in some, you know, rain, it's rain. So the purpose of this video is, it's just another one of those heads up videos, because the motivation of the person that's actually doing that is usually very good. They're just trying to be helpful. There's a few aspects to this. It's quite complex, of course, but there's a few aspects to it, and it depends on the person. But quite often what it is a person who's not used to speaking to someone who's speaking a second language, and this is a common thing. If you encounter people here, particularly out in the countryside like we obviously are here, if you encounter people who haven't actually spoken face to face with a foreigner before, which is a really common thing in Japan, you know, you'll encounter, even in the city, you will encounter people who have never spoken face to face with a foreigner. The only foreigners they've ever seen have either been on TV or at a distance, and they've never spoken face to face with a foreigner. And if you encounter a person here like that, that's never spoken face to face with a foreigner before, they really don't know how to handle it, and they're at it. Not always. Some people just slip straight into it, but quite often you'll meet people here who've just never spoken to a foreigner before, and you see it in their face. They're just totally overwhelmed. An old lady knocked on came to our front door recently and called out, "Sumimasen, sumimasen." I opened the door and she physically went backwards with her arms in the air. Oh. Because this big foreigner had answered the door, and just totally, sumimasen, ego nihongo dekimasu ka? You know, totally phased, absolutely totally phased, you know, which is totally understandable. You know, 150 years ago there was no foreigners in this country, you know, just in some little place down near Nagasaki, but you know, 150 years ago there was no foreigners here, so it's quite common to meet people here who've just never been close to a foreigner. So those people often don't quite know how to deal with it. So, you know, and a little bit of English is quite common on TV here, but like as we've said before on previous videos, it's usually just decoration. So things like no and things like that are often, comedians often use it here, because throwing in the odd English word into something here is sort of funny, and they'll sort of laugh at it, and it's all very funny and everybody has a laugh at it for some reason. So what happens is, people have heard the occasional English word and they'll just try it. Here they are speaking to a foreigner, and the fact that you're speaking Japanese reasonably well doesn't sort of come into it for them, because they're just not used to that, speaking to someone who's speaking a second language. Now, the opposite's also true. If you get foreigners that come to Japan who don't speak a second language themselves, now I've seen this before with friends and family members that come here that can only speak English, and they're not used to speaking to someone who's speaking a second language, and they'll speak to English to them at a normal speed with all sorts of colloquials and be impossible to understand. And it's just because they're not used to speaking to someone who's using a second language. So that's assuming that it's a foreign person in Japan speaking to a Japanese person in English, right? So the first thing is that the person you're speaking to might not be used to speaking to foreigners. That's the first point. The second point is that they might be just trying to use a little bit of English, just straight out novelty value, because you know, they might have spoken to a foreigner before, but it might be a rare thing for them and a real novelty, and they might want to throw in a little bit of English and try it out, and that's totally understandable. Those of you who study Japanese, if you meet a Japanese person, you're probably itching to try out your Japanese as well, aren't you? And meet a Japanese person, you might be tempted to say konnichiwa, you know, konnichiwa, you know, yoroshiku onegai shimasu, just to try it out, right? And give it a bit of a try out. So that's another aspect. So it could be someone who's not used to speaking to foreigners. It could be and or it could be someone who's just wanting to try out the little bit of English that they know, or it could be someone just trying to be kind, you know, and they're not stopping to think, well, he's actually speaking Japanese really well, so he probably knows the Japanese word for water, and the Japanese word for spoon, you know, and the Japanese word for no. So they're not thinking about that. They might be just trying to be helpful. So it could be any one of those three things or something else entirely. But the point is, they're not trying to make you feel bad, they're trying to make you feel good. You know, whichever of those circumstances or combination of those circumstances or whatever other circumstances that is causing them to use that occasional word for English, chances are they're trying to make you feel good, not make you feel bad. And as obvious as this sounds, and I know there'll be people sitting behind their computer there in the comfort of their own home thinking, well, it's obvious, what's he talking about? This isn't anything useful or new. It seems like that, it will seem like that, but when you actually live here for a long time, and a lot of these things that we've mentioned on the how-to playlist will sound trivial or petty to some people, and it's like, oh, that wouldn't bother me at all, that wouldn't bother me at all. And quite often when you first come here, it doesn't. But these topics are really talking about things that will bother people, that might bother people here long term. And that's what can happen is, you know, the first couple of times you get it, it might just, you might not even notice. But the 100th time or the 200th time you get it, it might start to really bother you. And then you've got to watch it because, you know, it's easy to react or to show your frustration or your irritation, and a lot of these things are like that. A lot of these things will wear you down because this is actually happening in amongst a whole heap of other stresses and strains. You're trying to renovate a house, talking to a bunch of tradespeople in Japanese. You know, that can be reasonably stressful on its own. So then if you throw little irritations like this into the mix, it can just up your tension level a little bit more, you know. So this is just basically a heads up. Hopefully these sorts of videos, the plan with these videos is that people who do come to Japan and spend some time in Japan, that if we've warned you about these things, that it might just, when it happens to you, it might not catch you off guard by so much, because it might come into the back of your head, hey, I've heard about this, and it might just save you from making a scene or causing a problem that might not really be there. You know, because, you know, you might feel the person's just being annoying, but in actual fact they're trying to be kind. And a lot of these things are like that things that quite often there's a cultural difference involved or a cultural misunderstanding involved that can turn something that was perfectly harmless and kind into something that's really annoying and could potentially cause you problems if you react negatively to it, which after the 200th time that it happens, you know, you might feel a bit irritated and you might just look, I know what a spoon is, I know what water is, you clown, you know, unhelpful reaction. So anyway, hopefully someone got some benefit out of this. If one person is saved from some hassle in the future because of this, it was a worthwhile chat. More videos coming soon.